The biting wind whipped across the dark waters of Lake Anjikuni, carrying with it an oppressive silence. Canada was a vast and mysterious country, filled with indigenous legends and stories that blurred the lines between reality and the supernatural. But none were as enigmatic as the disappearance of the entire village of Anjikuni, an event that remains unexplained to this day. For decades, the lake had been avoided. The elders told stories of water spirits, creatures that protected the place with supernatural fury. Some believed that the villagers had been taken by these guardians. Others said that something worse lurked in the depths of the lake. But no one, absolutely no one, dared to stay there after sunset. Even so, on that frigid night, 3 fishermen rowed across the dark waters, defying fate. And before we continue with this intriguing story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It helps us bring more content like this to you. Now let's get back to the story. Liam Carter, Ethan Roy, and Mark DuPont were seasoned fishermen, men hardened by the cold and the solitude of the northern waters. For years, they had survived by selling fish and furs, facing storms and glaciers without hesitation. But recently, the fish were disappearing. The nearby river no longer yielded good catches, and hunger was setting in. It was Liam who suggested the idea. "If the lake is empty, no one else fishes there, right?" he said, amidst the weak warmth of the campfire the night before. "That means the fish are waiting for us." Ethan scratched his full beard, hesitant. "You know very well that's not why the lake is empty." "It's just stories, Ethan," Mark interrupted. "Who believes that nonsense?" "I don't want to believe it." "But what if it's true?" No one answered. Silence fell as the wind howled outside. In the end, hunger spoke louder. They set off at dawn, carrying hooks, nets, and courage. The water was a black mirror. The moon barely reflected on the still surface, as if the lake were a bottomless well. The wooden boat creaked, rocking gently. No fish nibbled at the bait. No life seemed to exist beneath that dark immensity. "This is wrong," Ethan murmured, gripping the oar tightly. "This place is dead." "We've only been here a few hours," Liam replied. "The fish appear when we least expect them." Mark looked around, uneasy. The shores of the lake were strangely distant, as if they had drifted away from the real world. Then the first sign occurred. On the other side of the shore, a bluish light appeared among the trees, weak, flickering, almost like a will-o'-the-wisp. It flickered, disappeared, and returned, as if calling to them. "What's that?" Mark asked. Ethan squinted. "Maybe another campfire. Lost hunters." "There's no one here but us," Liam murmured. The light shone brighter, and then they heard the first sound. A voice echoed across the lake, a drawn-out, sad chant. It was an incomprehensible melody, like a lament coming from the depths of the earth. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. "That's not human." The water beneath the boat trembled, a low vibration, almost imperceptible, but which made the wood creak. They looked at each other, breathing heavily. Then Mark cried out, "There's something in the water." The boat rocked. Small whirlpools appeared around the vessel, as if something swimming just below was stirring the current. "Grab the oar!" Liam shouted. Mark pulled out the lantern, illuminating the water. In the reflection of the light, something shone down below. Eyes. Human eyes, but impossibly large and deep, staring up at them from underwater. The blue light on the shore shone brighter. The chant intensified. The boat was pulled backward, and then a hand came out of the water, pale, membranous, with elongated fingers and sharp nails. It gripped the edge of the boat tightly, making the wood crack. Then another hand emerged, and another, and another. They were not alone. "Row! Now!" Liam yelled. Ethan and Mark began to row frantically, but the boat didn't move. It was as if something was holding them underwater. Suddenly, a head emerged. The face of a creature that shouldn't exist. It was humanoid, but grotesque. Its skin was grayish, with a texture similar to that of an amphibian. The eyes were large and black, without pupils. Small orifices pulsed where its nostrils should have been. And its mouth, it was too wide, stretching from one side of its face to the other, opened in an unnatural smile. It whispered something, words that no one understood. And then, all the creatures rose to the surface at the same time. Dozens, maybe hundreds. The water was filled with black eyes, membranous hands, and mouths that whispered in a forgotten language. Mark fell backward, gasping for breath. Ethan couldn't move. Liam held his fishing knife, but he knew it was useless. The creatures didn't attack. They just watched. And then, as if they had reached a verdict, they began to drag the boat toward the center of the lake, to the deepest waters. The lantern trembled in Mark's hands. He looked around, desperate. "What do they want?" "To take us down," Ethan whispered. His voice was filled with certainty. Somehow he knew. They wanted them to see something. Something that should never be revealed. The icy water rose up the sides of the boat. Silence returned to the lake, and before them a new blue light shone in the water, now much stronger. Something was emerging from the depths, something bigger, something that the fishermen would never forget. The boat shook violently as the bluish light emerged from the depths of the lake. It was as if the ice itself melted and released something that had been trapped there for centuries. Ethan, Mark, and Liam were paralyzed. They couldn't take their eyes off what was emerging from the waters. The humanoid creatures around them moved back slightly, forming a circle, as if they were revering the thing that was about to emerge. The water bubbled, the air grew thick, and then they saw. First came the silhouette, a gigantic shadow, much larger than any creature they had ever seen before. Its body seemed to move fluidly, as if it were part of the water itself. Then came the eyes. They shone with an intense blue, pulsing as if they were alive, but they were ancient, filled with a knowledge that no human being could comprehend. Finally, its head emerged completely. It was humanoid in shape, but its skin was dark and scaly, and its face seemed to dissolve and rebuild itself every second, as if it were caught between two worlds. Its features changed constantly, sometimes resembling an old elder, sometimes an indescribable creature. And then came the voice. It wasn't a common sound. It was an echo within each of their minds. "You shouldn't be here." Liam put his hands to his head, feeling a sharp pain. Mark sobbed, unable to process what he was hearing. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut, trying to resist the impact of that voice. What are you?" Ethan managed to murmur. The creature tilted its head almost curiously. The blue eyes shone brighter. "The same as I have always been. The protector, the devourer." Liam clenched his fists. Protecting what? The lake? The creatures? Silence stretched on for seconds that seemed eternal. "I protect that which should never be discovered." And then, without warning, they saw. The images invaded their minds, violent and unavoidable. Visions of the past. Ethan saw a village which had existed long ago. Houses made of wood, weak lights from lamps flickering in the snow. Anjikuni, the vanished village. Men, women, children, all gathered at the edge of the lake, but they weren't alive. They were kneeling, motionless. Their eyes were empty, their mouths were open in a silent scream, and then a blue flash covered everything. The vision disappeared, and Ethan gasped, clinging to the boat. My God! Liam and Mark were pale. They had seen the same thing. The protector of the lake watched them, waiting for a reaction. "Did you kill them?" Mark asked, his voice trembling. "No." The creatures around the boat whispered together like a ghostly choir. "They offered themselves." Ethan felt his heart pound. Offered themselves? For what? The creature looked down into the darkness of the waters, so that he would not awaken. The boat trembled again. The water bubbled around it, and a terrible sensation overcame the three fishermen. Something much larger was sleeping at the bottom of that lake. Something ancient and hungry. And the inhabitants of the village of Anjikuni had sacrificed themselves to prevent him from awakening. And now the fishermen were in the wrong place, at the wrong time. Liam grabbed Ethan's arm, his voice little more than a whisper. "We need to get out of here. Now." Mark was crying softly. "We're going to die." The protector of the lake tilted its head. Its eyes shone even brighter. "Now, you understand." The creatures around them began to approach again. They were deciding the fisherman's fate. Ethan looked around, desperate. The boat was surrounded. "Please," he said, not knowing exactly who he was talking to. "We didn't mean to trespass. We didn't know." The protector drew a little closer, its presence overwhelming. "None of you should have seen. But now, there is no choice." Liam held his fishing knife. "There has to be a choice." Silence fell over the lake. The protector of the lake stood still, as if pondering the answer. Then it extended a gigantic hand toward the boat. "Then choose." The fishermen exchanged glances. Mark sobbed. Ethan looked at Liam, waiting for a decision. Liam gritted his teeth, and then, without warning, something moved in the depths. It wasn't the protector. It wasn't the creatures. It was him. Something was waking up. The protector raised its face, its blue eyes burning like beacons. "He has awakened." And before they could react, the water swallowed them. The icy water enveloped Ethan, Liam, and Mark in a deadly embrace, pulling them into the depths of the lake. The shock of the cold was so intense that Ethan lost his breath, his chest burning as his body sank rapidly. The world around him was a blue and black abyss, and the only thing he could see was the distant glow of the lake protector's eyes, watching as they sank. Mark struggled desperately, his air bubbles rising to the surface. Liam kicked, trying to swim back up, but there was no surface. The lake, once calm and mirrored, now seemed infinite with no clear end above or below. And, in the depths, he stirred. Something gigantic, a silhouette impossible to comprehend, pulsing in the dark. Ethan felt a voice inside his mind, but it wasn't the protector. It was something much older. So many ages, so much hunger. A shiver ran down his spine. It wasn't just a monster. It was something alive, something conscious, and now it was awake. The humanoid creatures swam around them, forming a circle. Their empty eyes seemed to glow with a mixture of reverence and fear. They weren't attacking. They were waiting. The lake protector moved in the water with a surreal fluidity, hovering before them. Its form seemed larger there, as if the depth gave it more power. Then the truth came. The villagers understood. They did what was necessary. The vanished village had not been massacred. They had offered themselves. Ethan looked around, desperate. The blue around him seemed to vibrate. They sacrificed themselves to trap it, didn't they? His voice echoed, even underwater. The protector tilted its head. "The seal feeds on souls." Liam's eyes widened. "They threw themselves into the lake to keep it trapped?" The silence answered for itself. Mark began to tremble violently. "No, no, no, no!" "And now he has awakened." The fishermen were brought to replace the villagers. Ethan felt a wave of despair wash over him. They had to get out of there. But it was too late. The creatures began to advance slowly. In the depths, something colossal stirred again. The darkness below them was not just darkness. They were tentacles, they were claws, they were eyes. The monster was rising. The water pressure increased. Mark held his head, screaming silently. It was as if reality itself were bending. And then, time stopped. The protector raised one of its hands, and the world around them trembled. There is still a chance. Liam tried to catch his breath. A chance? How? The protector watched them. It was as if it were evaluating. 3 came. "One may stay." Terror gripped Ethan. "One of us has to die." Mark began to struggle again, tears mixing with the water. "This can't be happening." But Liam already understood. A sacrifice. It was the only way to lock the monster away again. The question was, who? Time was running out. The monstrous presence below them rose, and soon there would be no more choices. The protector extended its hand. Choose. The pressure increased. They had seconds, And then someone made the decision, and everything went dark. The darkness swallowed everything, the lake, the screams, the blue glow. And then Ethan opened his eyes. He was back on the surface, gasping as if he had just been reborn. The icy air cut into his skin, his lungs burned. He was alive. Liam was beside him, coughing up water, clinging to the boat. But Mark wasn't there. The surface of the lake was as smooth as a mirror, as if nothing had happened, as if the lake had erased everything. Ethan spun around frantically. "Mark! Mark!" Liam looked around, desperate. "No, it can't be." Then both stopped. The water watched them. There was no more blue light. There was no more protector. And the scariest thing, the lake was completely calm. The air seemed dense, charged with something they couldn't comprehend. They survived. But at what cost? Liam turned to Ethan, his face pale and wet. He sacrificed himself. Ethan couldn't answer. His chest ached. The words echoed in his mind. 3 came. 1 may stay. Mark had made the choice for them. He knew that neither of the others would have the courage. So he gave himself up. Liam closed his eyes, swallowing hard. "We need to get out of here. Now." Without thinking twice, they rowed with all their might. Each pull of the oar seemed to take them away from that horror. The shore seemed unattainable, but they didn't stop. Until, finally, they reached dry land. The cold cut like razors as they stumbled out of the boat. They were exhausted, but something was wrong. The campsite wasn't there. The campfire they had left burning, gone. The traces of their footprints in the snow vanished. It was as if no one had ever been there. Ethan felt his chest tighten. "How long were we there?" Liam didn't answer, because he didn't know either. They turned to look at the lake and froze. The surface of the lake was perfectly calm, like black glass reflecting the starless sky. And then, right in the middle, bubbles began to rise. Something was still there. Ethan felt his body paralyze. That thing hadn't been sealed. Liam grabbed his arm. "We need to get out of here, now!" The two began to run, ignoring the snow, ignoring the cold, ignoring the exhaustion. Behind them, the lake remained silent. But before they disappeared into the forest, Ethan swore he saw something moving down there, something huge, something that shouldn't be there, and something that perhaps had never really slept. Ethan and Liam ran through the forest without looking back. Each step sank into the soft snow, the cold cut into their lungs, but they didn't stop. The lake receded behind them, but the horror did not. The two advanced along the trail that should have led them back to the base camp where they had left the truck, but nothing seemed right. "Where are our tracks?" Liam gasped, looking at the ground. "We came this way. We should see our footprints in the snow." Ethan looked around, despair growing. Nothing, no sign that they had passed there before, no footprints, no broken branches. It was as if the forest had erased them. The truth began to form in their minds. They never left. The snow began to fall again, covering everything in a white curtain. The silence was absolute. And then, footsteps. Ethan stopped abruptly. Liam heard it too. Footsteps behind them, fast, heavy. Ethan turned around, his eyes wide. Nothing. The forest was empty, but the footsteps continued. And this time they weren't just behind them. They were all around. The sound of feet sinking into the snow came from all directions, invisible, circling them like predators watching prey. And then, the whisper, a familiar voice, weak and drawn out, as if struggling to escape a frozen throat. Ethan, his heart almost stopped. He knew that voice. He turned around, his chest tight with fear. And in the middle of the snow, someone was standing. Mark, the lost friend, was there, standing, with his shoulders hunched and his arms hanging loose at his sides. His face was pale as the snow, his eyes deep-set, devoid of any emotion. Ethan took a step back, refusing to believe what he saw. "Mark!" Liam froze beside him, unable to speak. Mark raised his head slowly. His eyes were wrong, too dark, empty. And then he smiled. You shouldn't have left." Ethan pulled Liam by the arm. "Run!" The two darted through the forest, stumbling in the snow, ignoring the cold, ignoring the pain, but behind them, Mark followed. And the scariest thing? He wasn't running. He was just walking, but he was getting closer too fast. As if the space between them no longer followed normal rules. And then other footsteps began to emerge, many. The sound of feet crushing the snow, the low whisper of unknown voices. Liam looked over his shoulder, and his blood ran cold. The vanished village was there. The villagers of Anjikuni were standing in the forest, surrounding them, pale, silent, with eyes as dark as the bottom of the lake. Ethan pulled Liam, but he was paralyzed. "It's not real. This isn't real." But then Mark spoke again. "The lake always calls us back." And the forest dissolved around them. The wind disappeared, the cold vanished, and when Ethan blinked his eyes, they were back at the lake. The villagers were around the water, in absolute silence. Mark was in front of them, his face was still Mark's, but he wasn't Mark anymore. He smiled, tilting his head. "Now you understand." And then the lake began to open. The water swirled like a whirlpool, descending into a bottomless abyss. A spectral blue emanated from the depths, and in the middle of the hole, they saw the thing that should never have been awakened. Gigantic, impossible to describe, too many eyes, too many tentacles, too many mouths. The seal had been broken, and they were at the center of the final sacrifice. The lake protector had failed. Now there was only being taken by the abyss. Ethan held Liam's wrist. Liam held Ethan's. And together they fell into the void, into the endless hunger. The darkness swallowed them. Ethan and Liam fell into the abyss of the lake, pulled by the vortex that swirled like a bottomless hole. The cold was unbearable. Their lungs burned. They were dying. Or worse, they were becoming something else. The lake was devouring them. But before they lost consciousness, everything stopped. Ethan opened his eyes. He was no longer in the water. He was back in the boat. The lake was calm. And Liam was beside him, pale and gasping. Both were still alive. Ethan looked around, his heart racing. What had happened? The boat floated gently on the lake, exactly as it had at the beginning of the night. No creatures, no protector, no sign of Mark. Liam turned to him, his eyes wide. Was that real? Ethan didn't know how to answer. Everything seemed real, but at the same time, it was as if the lake had never been touched. The horizon was still dark. The starry sky was reflected in the water. Time seemed untouched. And then Ethan noticed the worst detail of all. The village was still missing. The lake was still here. Nothing had really changed. The seal had been remade. But how? Liam looked at his own body, his breathing rapid. "We escaped!" Ethan was about to answer, but then he felt something on his skin. His arm was different. He rolled up his jacket sleeve and swallowed hard. The skin on his forearm wasn't his anymore. It was grayish, membranous, like that of the creatures in the lake. Ethan looked at Liam, and Liam looked at him. And then, without needing to say anything, they understood the truth. They didn't escape. They were transformed. The lake let them leave, but not as before. They weren't human anymore. A shiver ran through Ethan's body. He looked at his hands, feeling a strange tingling running through his fingers. They had become part of the lake. Liam let out a choked cry. "We need to get out of here now!" The two grabbed the oars and began to row with force to the shore. Panic propelled them. They needed to get out of that damn place. And as they rowed, Ethan looked at the water one last time and saw his reflection. His face was still the same, but his eyes shone with a deep blue, just like the eyes of the protector. And it was there, at that moment, that Ethan knew. They hadn't been freed. They had been chosen. And one day, the lake would call them back. 2 months later, snow covered the streets of Churchill, a small town in northern Canada. Life there was hard, marked by constant cold and the solitude of the forests. Ethan and Liam never spoke again about what happened on Lake Anjikuni. They fled that night without looking back, driving for hours until they reached civilization. They told themselves that they would never return to those cursed waters. But deep down, they knew something was wrong. They were changing. Ethan began to notice small signs. In the shower, he felt the water slide over his skin, strangely, differently. His skin, once rough from the cold, seemed smoother, almost slippery. Sometimes he caught himself holding his breath for long minutes without realizing it. And the eyes. His eyes were getting darker. Liam also felt it. His skin itched every night as if something was growing beneath it. His body was colder. He woke up every dawn, sweating, feeling as if he were underwater. But neither of them talked about it. They avoided mirrors. They avoided questions. They avoided everything that reminded them of what had happened. But the lake didn't avoid them. That night, Ethan was alone in his small wooden house. The cold wind beat against the windows, making them tremble. The fireplace crackled, but the heat no longer reached him as before. Then he heard it. That sound, low, far away, but clear as a whisper within his mind, the chant, the melody he would never forget. Ethan's eyes widened. He looked around, his heart racing. The lake was calling. He stumbled back, gasping. No, this couldn't be happening. But then the phone rang. He answered it with trembling hands. Ethan, Liam's voice came from the other side, and it was full of fear. Are you hearing it? Ethan didn't answer. He knew the answer. Liam's voice trembled. I don't think we managed to escape. And at that moment, Ethan knew that the lake never let them go. The lake wanted them back. And sooner or later, they would have to answer the call. What did you think of this ending? Leave your opinion in the comments. We love to know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like to support our work. See you in the next video.